We need to talk about why the Sydney Sweeney OnlyFans scandal's gotten bigger and worse. The James Talarico Stephen Miller controversy just exposed a lot, including a bunch of snowflake hypocrites. And while you now have Texas school police pepper spraying, tackling, and tasering students left and right. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, so buckle up, hit that like button, and let's just jump into it, starting with this. The school cops in Texas are on some wild shit.
Breathe. You have to breathe.
And I mean, so many of the stories that you're about to hear, they're crazy. But let's start with the one you just saw, and then we're gonna break down why critics say that Texas schools, they become prisons, and students, they're treated like inmates. Right, so meet Annabelle Jaramillo. She was a 17-year-old honor student at Texas City High School when this happened a couple of years ago. And the thing that set everything off in motion was pretty simple. She rang a cheap plastic doorbell outside of a classroom, it broke off, and according to police, she walked away with it. But then the next day, the school suspending her for 3 days, accusing her of theft. But then Annabelle, she was like, what are you talking about? It was an accident, I was afraid of getting in trouble, so I put the doorbell in a nearby planter. So she goes to the assistant principal's office, right, to Miss Davis to explain what happened. But then when Miss Davis called in the sheriff's deputies to teach her a lesson about theft, Annabelle texted her mom, prompting Miss Davis to slap on 2 more days to that suspension for using a cell phone. With Miss Davis then telling her to leave, Annabelle wouldn't, and so the cops were like, all right, you're going to jail.
You're in the arrest right there. Come on.
What?
You have 2 seconds or I'm gonna make you do it.
You're arresting me?
Reportedly, one cop grabs her right arm, another grabs her left. Annabelle tries to pull away, and they wrestle this 4'11" girl to the floor, gripping her neck, pushing her face into the carpet, and handcuffing her. And Annabelle's apparently prone to panic attacks, so that appears to be what happened earlier, right? You saw her hyperventilating. But as the cops, they sternly commanded her to breathe, which is so helpful. Miss Davis reportedly just kind of pointed a fan at her, went back to her desk, and I'm not kidding, just starts eating potato chips. And so after 3 whole minutes of that, Annabelle went still, later saying she passed out. Or with her getting sent to the ER, and even after all that, she still went to the county jail for theft, where she says she had a second panic attack. And while the charge, that was ultimately dropped after she took an online course about stealing, her mugshot was still posted online for everyone to see. And so she ends up finishing her classes from home, she skips her graduation and saying, she's just traumatized about the whole thing to this day. And again, remember all of that, it was over a doorbell. And if after hearing all that and seeing all that, you think that's ridiculous, you are not alone. But for many, the reason that these school cops became a whole big thing is kind of understandable. Right? It goes back to the deadliest school shooting in the state's history, the one at Robb Elementary in Uvalde 4 years ago when a gunman murdered 19 kids and 2 teachers. And of course, you had families, schools, and state officials wanting to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. So the following year, lawmakers required each public school to have at least 1 licensed police officer on campus. It's actually one of the most ambitious programs of its kind in the country, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And while ordinarily, their work's pretty mundane, right? The cops guard the building, operate metal detectors, keep hallways free of fights, as you'd expect from any police department, sometimes they use force, and sometimes that force is excessive. And actually, I should get specific. When I say sometimes, I mean, you have the New York Times and San Antonio Express News finding over 2,600 use of force incidents from 2022 to the start of this year. And that was actually just with them looking at 1/5 of the state's school districts. So who really knows what the full number is? But you had cops grabbing or tackling students hundreds of times, pepper spraying them dozens more, and tasing them at least 9 times. Students were even held at gunpoint in 4 reported cases. And yes, I will say, in some of those cases, the kids were being violent, but in many others, the situation escalated from the smallest infraction. Like one time, you had a 15-year-old allegedly swearing in a hallway, and within no time, he was getting dragged into a room by his leg. Then somewhere else, you had another 15-year-old allegedly throwing a cheese stick at another student, so the cops slammed him onto the table after he tried to walk away. And then another one, you had a 14-year-old allegedly caught with a vape, and so then the cop restrained him and then smashed him into a wall, shouting, "Who else?" at the onlookers. In fact, cops reportedly used physical takedown tactics in about 60 situations where students ignored their commands, talked back, or pulled away. And it's not actually just high schoolers. Right? Reporters found about 24 cases involving elementary kids, including a 6-year-old who was handcuffed. In one district, a cop actually hogtied a 10-year-old boy with a behavioral disorder 3 separate times. Right? And out of 450 cases reviewed by the reporters, nearly a quarter left students with bruises, scrapes, or other injuries, and 2 teens had a concussion. Now, in their defense, you have supporters of school cops saying, they've broken up fights, confiscated weapons, and even prevented violent plots. And so one of the arguments you see is that even if things sometimes escalate too far, they also serve a genuinely useful core function, especially in schools where staff and teachers just can't handle violent incidents on their own. But then you also have critics countering that schools are now basically akin to correctional institutions and discipline has become draconian, arguing now if you violate the dress code, you don't go to the principal's office, you go face first into the ground. And many argue that it's easy to see why, because most Texas school cops come from regular police agencies, and their use of force policies are often copy-pasted straight from those agencies as well. And so they receive very little training in dealing with children, and we've seen in many cases that their conduct is less than professional, we'll say. Or they've yelled obscenities, insults, and threats at students. One cop telling a 7th grade boy to stop crying crying like a little girl. Another cop told a student who talked back to him, "Boy, I will hurt you." And perhaps one of the most insane incidents, a 17-year-old ran off campus with a vape pen. A cop then cornered him, pointed her gun at him, and shouted, "Get your fucking hands up before I shoot you." Meanwhile, the state actually has no oversight authority. The cop supervisors almost always back them up, and when they are held accountable, it's usually just a verbal warning or extra training. And so whether you support cops in school or not, it appears that the current system just isn't working. Whether it needs to be shut down, tweaked, fixed, or kept the same, that's obviously up for debate. And while we're gonna continue to see that play out, usually kind of incident to incident, for right now, I'll pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts? Let me know in those comments down below. But then that, it is by no means the only story about outrage and backlash today. This next one is very different because it's about the HBO show Euphoria and Sydney Sweeney. Because in this third and probably final season of the show that's about to end this weekend, Sydney Sweeney, while she, she's let the world know she has good genes, she has not often been in jeans this season. And that's because while Alexa Demi's Maddie manages sex workers, Hunter Schafer's Jules is a sugar baby, and Zendaya's Rue works at a strip club, Sydney Sweeney's Cassie is on OnlyFans, and that plot line's kind of gotten the most attention this season. But as her character has filmed content where she's a dog getting choked on its leash, she's posing provocatively while dressed as a baby, she's done various other things kind of clearly meant for shock value. And I don't just mean sex scenes, like there's this whole thing where she's a giant woman and her bare breasts break through windows. It's a whole thing. If you don't watch the show and you have someone describe it to you, they sound crazy. With all this blowing up, you then also had real world OnlyFans creators like Sydney Leathers telling Variety there's so much that they have her doing that is not even allowed on OnlyFans, and that alone is infuriating. The age play stuff where she's dressed as a baby in a diaper, for example. Credit card processors have very strict rules that you have to abide by, and the rules are getting stricter all the time. Or without pointing to a rule in the OnlyFans terms of service that forbids real or role-played activity depicting the exploitation or abuse of minors. So then also with this, you had another creator, Maitland Ward, telling Variety, this serves to perpetuate stereotypes that sex workers have no moral compass and that they will do anything for money. Rather than also telling TMZ,
it's saying like, oh, look at how weird and creepy they are. Look, you can just go on and do whatever you want and, you'll just make money right away, which is not the case.
It basically says that they're sort of inviting pedophiles, right?
Yes,
People
exactly.
who would
That's the whole reason you wouldn't be
Right.
allowed to do that. You don't want pedophilia anywhere near pornography. And I think, a lot of times OnlyFans creators and porn creators are thought of the same way as, oh, they're into, all the disgusting, like taboo stuff like that. And we're not. We want to be as far away from that as possible.
You've also had others taking issue with how lucrative the show makes sex work out to be, which, isn't to say that being an OnlyFans model cannot be incredibly lucrative. It definitely can. But you have some saying that it kind of makes it look immediate and guaranteed. But there are scenes where Sydney Sweeney's character gains hundreds of thousands of followers and subscribers overnight. And kind of from the moment that she joins the platform, she just starts making tons of money. And so touching on that, you had OnlyFans creator Gracie Kanan telling Page Six that she thinks there is a danger in romanticizing this job as overnight wealth. And you had creator Alex Lynx telling Variety, it's portrayed that if you just dress up and do crazy shit, you'll instantly make money, or you just have to be hot and have big boobs and you'll instantly cash out, and it doesn't work like that. So you're seeing an increasing number of people saying that the show just plays into stereotypes, that this is an absurd, ridiculous, and gross career. You even had USA Today putting out an op-ed saying, our patriarchal, sex-negative society looks down upon women who engage with online sex work and leaves many of them victims of exploitation, abuse, and social isolation. Shows like Euphoria certainly don't help. And saying the show's creator, Sam Levinson, clearly views OnlyFans as a passive, get-rich-quick scheme and belittles anyone who dares engage with it. And that's as you've seen other articles this season saying that this season of TV is a celebration of female degradation, right? And some arguing that it comes at the expense of actual sex workers. And it's because while on Euphoria, Sydney Sweeney's doing all this off-the-wall stuff, in real life, they're constantly being punished for the smallest things. For example, influencer and OnlyFans star Kayla Jade calling out Euphoria and saying,
like, we've come so far, but yet we still can't advertise without worrying about our accounts being deleted and like losing a whole income stream overnight, even though you've consistently followed the guidelines. I've lost count of how many accounts I've lost and had to restart over. Same with every other SW I know. But these big production companies can profit off the most like toxic, exploitative version of it, with none of the risks that real life SWs have to deal with. It just sucks that that show is like kind of obsessed with S workers, but like only in a way that dehumanizes them.
And the timing of all this, it does stand out, right? Sex workers right now, they're dealing with serious censorship. There's also currently a massive anti-porn movement that's happening in the country, or whether it be generally or actually state-by-state legislation. But also say, not everyone thinks that Euphoria is handling it badly. Chloe Cherry, for example, who previously worked in adult film and now stars in the show, recently told Glamour, when I'm watching it, I don't feel like I see it as glamorized. I don't want anybody to watch and think, oh wow, I want to go become a stripper. I want people to be like, oh, strippers are humans too. That's what I want people to say. And adding, in my opinion, opinion, I think Sam is using these young women as a vessel to show how society currently sees young women. I don't believe that he's trying to say it's these young women's fault that all the world wants from them is for them to just be hot and be sexy and be young. I think Sam's trying to say, look where we have got to in society. Right, arguing that the show's not just blatantly sexualizing women or treating them badly for the sake of it, but that this is actually meant to point to issues within our own culture. But with all that said, as this continues to be fought in the court of public opinion, I then have to pass the question off to you. Where do you stand on this? And I'd especially love to know your thoughts if you've been watching this season. And then we have more we need to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, I think a lot of people watching this, they have something that they've been almost ready to launch for a while now. Not almost ready because the idea needs work, almost ready because everything around the idea feels like a job in itself. And at some point, almost ready just becomes never. But Squarespace closes that gap, right? No website, no problem. Today, that changes because Squarespace makes it easy to start selling content, courses, physical or digital products, whatever you've been dreaming up. Their beacon tools will literally draft your site copy, suggest your layout, design, your pages. You just describe what you want and it builds around you. No coding, no guesswork, just results. Want to just showcase things? You want one-time payments, subscriptions, all the above? Done. Beacon can help you design and build the business, and Acuity, it handles the bookings. So by the time that your first client finds you, everything's already ready for them. And then once you're live, their built-in analytics and their marketing tools, they keep everything running like clockwork, so you can just focus on what you actually care about. So be done with the procrastination. Your free trial waits right now at squarespace.com/Phil, or just scan that QR code. Today is launch day. And just remember that when it's ready to go live, use code Phil to get 10% off and let them know we sent you. But then, Devin, right back into the news. This James Talarico Ken Paxton situation is crazy, stupid. It's part of the reason I hate politics, but of course, we need to talk about it because you may not fuck with politics, but politics will fuck with you. Because in Texas, there's a big Senate race. You have Talarico securing the Democratic Party nomination back in March, and then Paxton, the Trump-backed candidate, he clinched the Republican nomination in a runoff this week. And already, they've turned their sights on each other. They've come out swinging. Though Paxton and his supporters, they're seemingly grasping at straws, throwing out things like the false claim that Talarico is vegan, trying to insult him and argue that he's not man enough to represent Texas. Whereas Talarico, he's honing in on the various criminal and corruption allegations that have dogged Paxton for years now. And so, for example, with Paxton and his victory speech, he slammed what he claimed were Talarico's extreme positions on gender, immigration, religion, and other issues. He also seemed to be kind of like peer reviewing various mocking nicknames.
Some people know him as Tofu Talarico. Some people call him Six Gender Jimmy. I've even heard some people call him James Talarico. And others refer to him simply as Low T Talarico.
And actually with that last one, there was an attack ad that launched the next day that was labeled Talarico Too Low T for Texas. And you've kind of seen a lot of the right-wing voices kind of going all in on this meat and masculinity angle.
The reason why Democrats are failing is because they've given up on masculinity. They've given up on testosterone. They've given up entirely for effeminate, estrogenic, catty, and totally embarrassing candidates like Beto and Beta here. And most importantly, the American people know what leadership looks like. It looks like President Trump winning 119 out of 119, a 100% endorsement record. Donald Trump is winning across the board.
It is not this baby lotion soft child. He looks prepubescent. Yes. He looks like such a beta male. Beta O'Rourke was his big brother in the after school program.
They nominated someone more effeminate than Beto, and I can't wait for this race to get underway. Did you know that he looks prepubescent?
These are the notes you took?
Did you know that he looks like the guy that leaves an apple on the teacher's desk? That's this guy. Now, the major factor in this race, Greg, is whether Talarico's vegan.
And well, with all this, I think the Democrats just need to continue being on the attack with Paxton, right? Not play defense. That kind of just puts you on your back foot. And we are going to talk about all the easy things they can talk about with Paxton. I did also want to take a moment to talk about things like, as far as like where the vegan claim comes from. You did have Talarico claiming during his 2022 Texas House re-election bid that he was running a non-meat campaign because it was existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption. Apparently that was just for a period of time. Also, one of the other main attack angles is focused on Talarico's past comments advocating for transgender rights, including when he said that God is non-binary during a debate over legislation requiring students to play on K-12 sports teams matching their biological sex. And then where people were saying that he said that there were 6 biological sexes, you had Talarico referring to people with chromosomal variations during a committee debate over a similar bill. And so then also a big thing that popped up is that seemingly combining all of these attacks together, you had Trump advisor Stephen Miller writing on Twitter, the Democrats made history in Texas by nominating their first first transgender Senate candidate, which then got a response from the official Democrats account that said, "Shut up, you ugly fuck." And actually with this, I do need to go on like a mini bubble rant. Okay, so understand this part is a little bit of op-ed. Following that tweet, you had kind of all the worst right-wingers that you've ever seen, right, who have said the craziest shit for years, who have endorsed and supported a president who has said the craziest and threatening shit for years, all of a sudden clutching their pearls and going, oh my God, how horrible, how uncivil, how actually violent this message is. You had Stephen Miller's wife, Katie Miller, going on a Fox News to cry about it while then also at the same time trying to shame a woman who she said was responsible for the post, with then just a chunk of the internet responding that she actually looks like an attractive, fun, smart person. It turns out she's actually getting married. So also people started congratulating her for a number of reasons. Then you also had Katie Miller saying that liberal women, they have high rates of mental illness. They're just so sad, which you are probably not the best messenger for this. Katie, you literally fucked Stephen Miller on purpose. Like, you didn't lose a bet or anything. That is the craziest shit I've ever heard of. Talking about mental illness, you got me wanting to stop making this show right now and start marching in the street for healthcare for all so you can get the mental help you seem to need. But back to the news as far as Talarico. He firmly rejected the claim that he's vegan.
I'm not a vegan. I'm an 8th generation Texan. I've been eating barbecue since before Ken Paxton's first indictment. And this campaign basically runs on Texas barbecue. If all they have is lying about me being a vegan, I feel pretty good about our chances this November.
He then also responded to Paxton's Talarico label.
Well, I think if Ken Paxton is worried about freaks, he should stop giving Epstein-style sweetheart deals to pedophiles.
And that's actually a very big one. He is referring to the fact that Paxton's office offered a plea deal to a man charged with repeatedly sexually abusing a young boy that would have let him serve just 1 day in jail and avoid registering as a sex offender. And actually with that, Talarico really wanted to keep things in perspective when it comes to the seriousness of the criticisms either candidate's facing.
There are statements that I've made where I've missed the mark. I'll be the first to admit that. But Ken Paxton is intentionally clipping my cringy comments to distract from his career of corruption.
And actually with that, we should talk about Paxton's career, because while there is no objective measure to definitively label Paxton the most corrupt politician in America, Talarico's claims, they don't come out of nowhere. Right, for example, going back to 2015, the same year that Paxton was sworn in as Attorney General, Paxton was indicted on charges including securities fraud. And according to the indictment, the actual crime took place back in 2011 when he was a state representative. Allegedly, Paxton pushed his friends and colleagues to invest in a tech startup while posing as an investor himself when he was actually being paid by the company. But his trial was then repeatedly delayed, with prosecutors claiming most holdups were caused by Paxton. And so he spent nearly a decade serving as the state's top law enforcement official despite facing those criminal charges, and even while federal authorities opened another investigation into several other potential corruption crimes committed while in office. And famously, in 2023, state representatives, including several Republicans, voted to impeach him on 20 charges. Charges that included misapplication of public resources, bribery, obstruction of justice, false statements in official records, conspiracy and attempted conspiracy, dereliction of duty, unfitness for office, and abuse of public trust. And many of those charges stemmed from his relationship with a real estate investor and wealthy donor whom Paxton allegedly helped and protected. And that's also his other charges centered on his retaliation against whistleblowers who reported his conduct. But then the Republican-dominated Senate acquitted Paxton, and less than a year later, 3 weeks away from a trial that could have handed him a life sentence, he ended up striking a deal to have the charges from 2015 dropped. And actually all he had to do in exchange was complete 100 hours of community service, take a 15-hour course on legal ethics, and pay roughly $300,000 in restitution. And for Paxton, $300,000 ain't much. Because despite living for more than 20 years on the relatively modest salary of a public official, he's gone from being a middle-class lawyer to a multimillionaire. And that's thanks to investments including into a local company that secured a lucrative state contract the year after he first entered office. An investment, by the way, he reportedly failed to disclose. But in any case, Paxton has maintained his innocence, calling the deal the conclusion of a decade-long political prosecution. His attorney emphasizing that the agreement hadn't been a plea bargain and didn't represent an admission of wrongdoing. Also in the final weeks of Biden's term, the DOJ ended its own corruption investigation, deciding against bringing charges, with many seeing that as them just knowing that Trump was coming in and was probably going to kill it. And so now, for more than a year, especially with Trump back in office, he's been a man kind of unencumbered by the threat of consequences for actions. And that's even though the scandals haven't fully gone away. But there are things like he's reportedly claimed that 3 houses are his primary residence, committing what the Trump administration has repeatedly claimed is a serious crime, but only when it accuses his enemies of doing it. Just last year, his wife of 38 years, she accused him of adultery and filed for divorce on what she said were biblical grounds. And so while this is still Texas, and I would personally say that Paxton is still the favorite in my eyes because there's a lot of runway from now till November. Whatever the truth of all the many allegations that Paxton has faced, even in a post-Trump America, you have many saying that is a lot of baggage to try to get into the Senate with. And it's one of the reasons why you're seeing Dems kind of optimistic about this race, especially as the cash has been pouring in. Or just to give you an idea, Talarico's campaign reportedly raised more than $3 million in the first 24 hours after Paxton came out as the Republican opponent. That is the most money the campaign's raised in a single day, which is really saying something because they raised $2.5 million earlier this year, shortly after CBS decided not to air that interview with Talarico that he did with Stephen Goldberg. And overall, Talarico raised $27 million in the first quarter of the year, which is one of the highest totals by a Senate candidate ever. Whereas Paxton's campaign and its committees took in $2.2 million over the same period. And so with all that, you had one GOP consultant telling NBC News that groups supporting Paxton are likely going to have to quadruple their original spending for the race to defend their majority in the Senate. And you have some worried that they're possibly going to drain resources from other key battlegrounds. But of course, there's a long road to November. It's too early for anyone really to get confident, and we're going to be here to see what happens. Right, but then also, while we're talking about Republicans, we should talk about Republicans in North Carolina who just proposed a constitutional amendment that would effectively legalize murder to stop abortions. And no, I'm not actually even exaggerating for a punchy intro or clickbait. This is one of the most extreme bills that we've seen in this post-Roe era. Right, so the proposal in question here was sponsored by two Republican members in the North Carolina State House. You got Representatives Keith Kidwell and Ben Moss, and specifically this legislation would establish that, quote, a distinct and separate human life begins when the egg and sperm combine during fertilization, and as a result, quote, that human life is recognized by the state as an individual person entitled to the protection of the laws of this state. And so not only would the measure ban all abortion from the moment of conception, it would also make it so that anyone who tries to get or facilitate an abortion would get charged with attempted murder, and those who succeeded would get charged with first-degree murder. But then also, the text of this proposed law explicitly states, any person has the right to defend his or her own life or the life of another person, even by the use of deadly force if necessary, from willful destruction by another person. Or in other words, it would authorize the use of deadly force to prevent an abortion from happening. And so unsurprisingly, when this was unveiled, it got a ton of traction and a lot of backlash online, with many arguing that in addition to just being outright fucking insane, it doesn't even make logical sense. Or you had some people posting that if someone used deadly force against a pregnant woman getting an abortion and kills her, the fetus would also die. Because regardless of how you might feel about abortion, experts widely agree that a fetus can't viably live outside of its mom until 23 to 24 weeks of gestation. But then that's also not the only hole in the legislation, as one person on Twitter noted. Oh, so a rapist can impregnate a woman against her will and then legally kill her if she tries to get an abortion, saying Republicans hate women. And then beyond that, you also had a lot of people arguing that because the language in this bill is so vague, it could jeopardize in vitro fertilization, emergency contraception like Plan B, and even birth control methods like IUDs, with one journalist claiming on Twitter, it's basically a get out of jail free card for men who want to murder their partners. All they have to do is prove the woman intended to use birth control or have an abortion. In fact, the proposal got so much backlash that one of the sponsors, State Representative Ben Moss, actually ended up pulling his support, saying in a statement that he was removing his name as a sponsor after further discussion and feedback from constituents and members of the community. And while he went on to say that he is still anti-abortion, he believes that the legislation must be written with absolute clarity, and adding, the purpose behind this legislation was to affirm the value and dignity of human life, not to suggest that women should face capital punishment or to create uncertainty surrounding difficult medical situations. But adding, unfortunately, portions of the bill's current language have led to significant misunderstandings that distract from the core pro-life message and intent. So there you had plenty of people pushing back, saying it's pretty hard to see how anyone can misunderstand or misinterpret the bill, like we all read what it says. But regardless, the bill only has one sponsor left, and even before that, it was seen kind of essentially as dead on arrival. For one thing, it's a proposed constitutional amendment, meaning that it would have to get 3/5 support in the legislature to even make it onto the ballot. And then the voters, they'd still have to approve it even after that. But also, you have experts arguing that even if this bill never really had a shot, we should all still take these outlandish pieces of legislation very seriously. Right, as Jessica Valenti, the author of the Abortion Everyday newsletter on Substack, put it, whether or not a bill has a chance of passing right now is beside the point. In fact, one of our weaknesses as a movement is that we're stuck on reacting to current threats rather than looking decades forward. And adding, that's certainly what the anti-abortion movement's doing. They're laying the groundwork now for laws that they want to pass in 10 or 20 years. And adding, with bills like this, Republicans are giving us a roadmap. Why in the world would we ignore it? But they're also going on to argue that this kind of legislation also poses a cultural danger, right? Noting that death threats against clinics and providers, they doubled in the last year, and adding, this bill sends the message that violence against providers isn't just fine, but brave. And you have others noting that with Kidwell, this is following a trend. In his first term, for example, he proposed a 13-week abortion ban and then took it to the next level in his second term, floating a measure that would ban abortion when a heartbeat was first detected. And then last year, he introduced a measure that would have classified abortion as a Class B1 felony, the same level as rape and kidnapping, and this latest bill, of course, went even further. And so the fact that you have elected officials not only talking about this, but building legislation, it's something you have to pay attention to. Especially because, of course, remember, not too long ago, the idea of overturning Roe v. Wade, it seemed impossible to so many people. But slowly, through years and years of steady work, packing the cords, taking the long-term approach, conservatives made it happen. If you think that they've switched up the game plan, my only question is, how big was the thing that dropped on your head? Right, and then from that, I've got more news that you need to know about today. But first, I'm gonna try to convince you to go outside, touch grass, and hang out with me for a little bit.
We just finished a sold-out show here in New York City, and the energy was amazing, Phil.
It was great. You had a chant going, it got weird, it got fun, it got crazy. But we have more coming because we're gonna be doing live shows in Seattle, Portland, Boston, Philly, San Francisco, Phoenix, Denver, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Paul, DC, and Pittsburgh.
CrashingOutTour.com. Get your tickets now or check the link in both of our bios.
So yeah, I got a link in the description and also the top pinned comment of this video. Get your tickets. Even though those 12 days are actually a few months away, our Seattle show, I think also maybe Portland is on low ticket alert. It's a blast. You'll be around other beautiful bastards and you stop doom scrolling for a few hours. But like I said, there's still more news you need to know about today because the Trump administration is now actively drawing up plans to cut international flights at major airports in sanctuary cities. And all of this is in retaliation against immigration protests like those we talked about in New Jersey earlier this week, with Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin saying those international flights shouldn't be going to cities where, quote, local radical left Democrats aren't allowing us to do our job and enforce federal laws. Right, he floated this idea back on Fox News last month, explaining,
some of these cities have international airports. If they're sanctuary cities, should they really be processing customs into their city? We're asking them to partner with us at the airport, but once they walk out of the airport, they're not going to enforce immigration policy. Maybe we need to have a really hard look at that because we need to focus on cities that want to work with us.
So you're saying that big cities that are sanctuary cities that have a big airport, they might lose their customs?
Well, I'm saying we're going to have to start prioritizing things at some point.
And this week, you've got them taking aim at Newark specifically. Right there, protesters have been raging outside of an ICE facility for days now, with reports saying that detainees are on a hunger strike after being kept in poor conditions without the proper medical resources. With Markwayne saying,
and they're barricading our employees from coming in and out of the facility, then why are we processing international flights into the airport there? They don't want us to enforce immigration, but they want us to process immigration at their facilities. Nothing about that makes sense to me.
Right, but then you also have others saying that the protest could be the detainees' only way to let people know what's actually going on.
I would posit that in this case, part of our responsibility is simply to bear witness. There are detainees inside that building. They have no criminal record. They are not being treated in a way that is humane. They want the three of us and they want all of you at home to know what is happening to them inside that detention facility in our name, with our tax dollars.
But Mullins, he's not buying that. And so if he does pull the trigger here outside of Newark, it could impact airports in LA, Philly, New York, and plenty of others on the Justice Department's list of sanctuary cities. And just to hit on how big this could be, more than 50 million international travelers came through 3 major New York area airports alone last year. And that's not even mentioning how much international cargo you'd have to think about. And so as you might expect, this isn't going over well with a lot of people.
This is just a new level of stupid.
I mean, even people within Trump's own administration, like Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, have said we shouldn't shut down air travel in a state that doesn't agree with our politics. But of course, words are words and actions are actions, and the actions we've seen from people in the administration as they do what dear leader wants. But then also other big news we should talk about. You have a former CIA agent who was thrown in jail after FBI agents seized $40 million worth of gold in his home that they say that he stole from his job. Right, and while there are a lot of unanswered questions right now, the former agent in question is David Rush. And you have reports saying that he started making requests for, quote, large amounts of foreign currency and tens of millions of dollars in gold bars for work-related expenses between November of last year and March of this year. And he was given the money and the gold, but since then, no one's actually been able to figure out what work expenses he claimed that he needed them for. With him then apparently keeping some of it at his office and another part at his home. Because in the investigation, they found 303 gold bars along with $2 million in US currency along with 35 luxury watches. And I have to note here, some of the stuff that he stole still has not been recovered yet. And with that, you have the FBI saying there was probable cause to believe that Rush, quote, knowingly embezzled, stole, purloined, or knowingly converted a thing of value of the United States for his personal use. And so now he's been charged with stealing public money. But it also doesn't stop there. And that's because the FBI also claims that Rush obtained a fraudulently inflated salary and fraudulently obtained military leave, as well as he just lied about his background. And there, they say that he lied when he enlisted in the Navy in 1997 by giving them doctored transcripts from Clemson University. And while he was honorably discharged in 2015, the FBI says that he claimed to still be enlisted, allowing him to get tens of thousands of dollars in compensation for taking military leave. They then also say that he applied to work for the federal government 3 times, and there, he claimed 2 other degrees from 2 other places, which also helped him get his security clearance. And by 2018, he also claimed to have graduated from the US Air Force Test Pilot School to apply for her senior executive service and claimed to be the director of test for a military weapons test organization. And so with all of that stacked against him, he is now sitting behind bars, and his hearing's actually set for tomorrow. But then the final thing that we have to talk about today before you go back into the wild, this is my favorite story today. A cop pulled this woman over, claiming that she was using her phone with her right hand, except she doesn't have a right hand.
You drove past me holding the phone with your right hand, manipulating that phone.
So that's Katie, a Florida influencer who documents her life as a disabled athlete. And the craziest part of this whole thing is that after he sees her arm, the cop doubles down.
So you want to just call this a day? Or?
I don't want to call it a day. You had a hand up manipulating.
You just said my right hand.
Well, I thought I saw you with your right hand. You
so
had a
you
hand
didn't.
up. The right hand. I saw you manipulate.
So you didn't.
With the right hand, perhaps not. Hand to God, you don't have funny hand.
Hand to God.
The other hand to God, you don't have funny hand.
Hand to God.
Cool.
My guy, there is no other hand. But then even after all that, he tickets her anyway. And also here's the thing, this is kind of wild. Even if she did have a hand to hold a phone, in Florida, that by itself is not illegal. You can't text or type, but actually looking at something like Google Maps, that's actually fair game. Granted, I wouldn't recommend it. I like you and other people being alive. I'm a big fan of that. But as far as the ridiculousness of this situation, she ended up taking it to court, and surprise, surprise, a judge just dismissed it because of lack of evidence. Which yeah, literally. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of your Thursday Philip DeFranco show dive into the news. I don't know about you, this was actually a very interesting one for me today. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you definitely for hitting that like button, helping support the show, keep us in your algorithm. And hey, if you're not 100% filled in, you want to laugh, you want to rage, you want to feel feelings, definitely check out the brand new episode of Crashing Out that just came out. It'll even give you a small taste of what it's going to be like when you go to crashingouttour.com, get yourself some tickets, come see us live in a few months. But with that said, thank you for watching. I love yo face, and I'll see you right back here next time.